Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Mastering Dungeons. I'm Shawn Merwin here with my effervescent co-host Teos Abadia. Hey Teos, how you bubbling today?
I'm bubbling away. I'm percolating to the top of the
Mhm.
charts of your hearts.
That's
I don't
good.
know.
That's good.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
How
I
are
had
you?
a
Are you? Yeah.
I had a unique experience this weekend. I played in a game with the gaming group that I had played with in high school.
Hmm.
Some of these folks had not played since first edition days,
Wow.
including the DM who I first played with, I want to say 35 years ago.
Yeah.
And it was cool because some of these folks obviously hadn't played second, third, fourth, or fifth edition. So we're playing fifth edition via Roll 20, and they fell right back into the game as if they'd never left, but they fell right back into first edition. So it was it was a unique experience to see these folks, you know, like we go into the shop and we're buying like every spike and every rope and every,
Yeah.
yeah. And it's, the big goal is in front of us. You need to go to this keep, and we spent 3 hours and we never left town and spent most of that time tracking down other leads. Now we have like 12 different places we could go. And it was such a first edition thing that was weird, but somehow refreshing,
Yeah.
to just sort of play this different style of game using a rule system that really doesn't expect that sort of
Yeah.
game to be played. So it was kind of fun.
Well, I'm jealous. I would love that. I would murder to. Well, okay, I wouldn't murder, but I would do a
Yeah.
lot to get a game with either my friends from uh, college, from the early college days, because I actually
Mhm.
played with college friends first, and then with ex high school friends more. But so my college group, or even to go back into middle school with the group from Columbia. I'm in touch with one person from that group, but if I could get like, three of them or something, that would be just the coolest thing ever to just, yeah. And it would be wild to think of like, what would it be like to try to run a more modernish game with them. I mean,
Mhm.
we had a player in there that really, I think he was there literally for, the private part jokes. Like that's his reason. That was his motivation of play. His
Yeah.
character names were always, some swear slash body part, whatever thing. And just he was there, just BSing throughout the entire experience. And I doubt that has changed. you
Yeah.
know? And
Oh,
so
I still have players like that. So it's,
that's true.
yeah.
Yeah.
But so that was fun and unique. And speaking of fun and unique, let's talk about our listener corner, where we take messages, comments, questions from our listeners via Twitter, via Mastodon, via YouTube, via our website, any way you can get us. And the first comes from frequent asker Chappy Thoughts, via Mastodon. Given the controversy over half elves and half orcs, is there any reason you couldn't just have an elf with a shield dwarf subrace, for example? I mean, if all races were expanded to have subraces, couldn't that solve the issue pretty neatly? And I think the issue is that there are multiple issues here. The mechanics aren't the issue with a lot of with specifically with half elves and half orcs and other half races. It's not a mechanical thing, it's a societal thing. It's our very real world and very human problems because of ideas and history of racial relationships are causing the problem, racial identity and so on. It's the things that people bring out of the real world and into the game that is problematic, not necessarily just the mechanics of how these races work. So you can change the mechanics all you want until we understand and recognize these societal problems that have been brought into the game and in some places continue to be brought into the game. Then it doesn't matter what your mechanics are because that problem will still be rear its ugly head.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the more that, and sometimes you hear folks say like, "This is never a problem at my game," and a lot of times it's not a problem at your game because you're not thinking about the issue, and so
Mhm.
you just plod along and life is great. But when you do think about it, it becomes tough. And I think that's where, Jeremy Crawford saying that the team has long struggled with this and what it implies. And it's really just, like I'm fine with it because I think that I can understand where the game is going, what it's trying to provide and what it's trying to say, and the outlet it's trying to let you do to play somebody who has this sort of conflict, right? But the base position of the game historically has been like, if you are a half elf, you are shunned by both people and belong to neither,
Mhm.
right? And as somebody who's from mixed parentage, and I've had, a lot of my life, especially earlier life when I was out in the sun a lot more and I tan like crazy, is folks would say to me, "What are you?" Right? "What's your dad?"
Mhm.
Right? Or things like that. And that kind of thing, sometimes when you go to the game sort of just hits you with and here's more of that. And you're like, well, I came to escape the reality of life, right? And and so how you
Yeah.
feel about it's going to depend on your lived history or who you've been friends with and how you've been able to see that issue. And so I agree a lot of this is really
Yeah.
societal. Mechanically,
Mhm.
there are a lot of ways you can do it, but I think you quickly end up asking, well, why am I trying to do this mechanically? If there's already the societal problem, right? So if I take away from halves and I simply say, can I be an elf that takes dwarven subrace, subspecies benefits,
Mhm.
with the way that you sort of see in the Kobold Press playtest packet? So that's a way to mix things up. But then why are they species traits if they're not really? If anybody takes them, then shouldn't that just move to
Mhm.
something else? Like, and
Yeah.
and and that's the problem, is kind of what story are we trying to tell? How do we balance between wanting to tell great stories that create imaginative concepts, right? I mean, I think it's really fun to think about the elven cities that are carved out of trees and some sort of harmony with nature that we can't even
Mhm.
imagine achieving. That is a cool, beautiful picture and creates great play opportunities as long as you have the freedom to tell whatever elf story you want and to know that not all elves somehow fit some typecast, right? And
Mhm.
none of that is really achieved through the mechanics of it. And so I think you have to start with that story first, and then the mechanics really is what are these mechanics touching on, and then they should work off of that basis.
Right. What we did with Grim Hollow and Aurora, Grim Hollow more specifically was, say, rather than being a race and pick your package of racial abilities and stats, you're in a clan. And you can be from any race in that clan. And here's a list of abilities that you can choose from. So if you are a human and you are a member of this clan, you might not have dark vision. So don't take dark vision. But take these other things. Right, rather than getting like a normal human, a +1 to everything and extra languages, you get this because you're a part of this clan. And
Yeah.
you have your whole life trained in fishing. So you're going to get a proficiency and, with fishing tools or whatever hunting tools or whatever tools that you want to use. And if you want to be a dwarf from that same clan, take dark vision and then choose from this list. Maybe in this clan uh you were more of a merchant rather than more of a hunter. So take these more merchant type things and the proficiency with vehicles rather than with fishing. So
Yeah.
that's one way to do it. But, part of the problem with this is that it's always been there in D&D. It's been there since first edition. You choose your race. It's very easy to do. You can just write down this list of things and it's done. You don't have to pick and choose and think. So it's grappling with the sacred cow of that way of game design and the ease of just picking one thing and then getting a bunch of things from it. So it's not an easy topic to broach
No.
for game design reasons, for societal reasons, for storytelling reasons, for lots of reasons.
Yeah, my son and I were having this, and my wife and I were having this sort of discussion around. I forget in what concept came up, but we were watching a show. And we're sort of like, well, it's like if you're making the show, like if you're trying to set up a character for the show, and you're trying to say that they are of a certain income level, you're going to have them dress a certain way, you're going to have them act a certain way. And those are all stereotypes, but it's
Mhm.
what we do to quickly communicate to the brain that all of this works. And that's sort of what the rules are trying to do. Is right. You're trying to say, I'm going to adopt this character. So therefore, if I just pile on tropes, boy, isn't that easy, right?
Mhm.
And so it makes perfect sense why the rules are written the way they are, because they're trying to just launch you off into playing that stereotype, which is, and it works either way. I mean, if you could be playing a robot, right, you're going to make this halting robotic voice, and you're just
Mhm.
troping off of robots who fortunately aren't a real thing that we have to worry about. But yeah, and those are hard questions as to what extent you want to do that. But I think a balance can be struck, but the halfness is I think so, it has so many issues that I don't think a mechanical issue solves
Yeah,
it. I think what the game is
exactly.
doing is probably as smart as it can be, which is to say, we're not going to have it as an entry in the book. You can obviously use this custom lineage type approach to achieve that if that's what you want.
Mhm. So thank you for that question, Chappy Thoughts. And now to Graham Ward via our Patreon Discord. What do you think the default assumption of the game with regard to home design campaigns versus published adventures is? When we talk about a game, how much should published adventures factor into the discussion? Is it still true that the majority of groups don't play published scenarios? I'm thinking about the DMG and how it's clearly written with the assumption that the DM is an experienced person inventing their own scenarios and campaigns. Well, first of all, Graham, you're in luck because today we're going to talk in our main section all about the Dungeon Master's Guide, both the current Dungeon Master's Guide and the one that Chris Perkins talked about being in the process of writing. So let's take one question at a time. What do you think the default assumption of the game is with regard to home design campaigns versus published adventures? I don't think the game itself makes any assumptions on whether the DMs are going to create homebrew worlds, homebrew adventures, use strictly published worlds and adventures, or some variation of those too, stealing things from, or I shouldn't say stealing because it's not, leveraging other people's works. But I think we can look at some assumptions that the game does make and then sort of backwards look at this. I think the game assumes that the DM will either create or use something as a blueprint for the sessions they run, and that the numbers that the game makes will be the numbers that they use. That's why things like difficulty class, things like challenge rating for monsters are so important, because the game does assume that you are going to use those in a way that gives a clear expectation for what the players must overcome. So you need to get to those numbers in some way, and published content gets you that blueprint in a literal blueprint form. You have the adventure in front of you, and the numbers are there, and the plot is there, and everything's there. Uh, I think the game also assumes, or at least the designers also assume, that DMs will be making on the fly adjustments. And so we assume those adjustments are also being made to make the game more fun, more challenging, more entertaining to the players. Now, whether that's true ends up being a whole other discussion. But the published adventure should be a discrete example of what the game designers feel like the game should be, and these adventures and these worlds and these scenarios should show. I'm going to stop there and let Teos have his little take.
Yeah, my little take,
This.
I'll disagree with you a bit in that I think that the DMG specifically, it takes an approach that is, you really is, part one, master of worlds, and we'll talk about this more. But the book is really, it really is sort of helping you build a campaign, and it's talking about things like what your pantheons should be. And I think it did that looking back at the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons DMG as sort of its blueprint of how much that inspired people, right? DMs of that started with that book would talk about, how great it was to have all these ideas and think about things in ways that they never had thought about before. We're in a slightly different era, so I don't know that it works as well. I mean, I think it does not work as well as the AD&D DMG did, even though it tries to do that. But this premise is more around home design campaigns, and reading over like just the intro, none of it really says, hey, you could run in any number of ways, here are some various ways. And even the player's handbook doesn't really say, hey, here are all these different types of games you might be involved in. That one, I think, is just squarely very generic, right? It focuses on what's doing rather than looking at the larger game for most of it. So I think there is that slant to this book, of defaulting to home. Statistically, almost any poll I've seen shows a more than half of players, or DMs or whatever it is, working with a homebrew, home design campaign rather than running published adventures. And that is particularly shocking because that would be the group that would be most likely to be undercounted. So seeing enough polls that show this, especially ones that have, thousands of people taking these polls, is kind of like alarming because it means that a lot of the material should actually probably be a little more like the DMG and speak to it. I still think it's good to cover the bases a little more widely, but it might be that really is the audience, right?
See, I see it the opposite way. I see it those polls are generally taken by people who are most invested in the game.
Mm.
And the people who are most invested in the game are more likely to think about their own games and create their own games. And that's just my opinion.
Maybe.
I think I would say, wouldn't you say that most DMs have probably run like the starter set? Or at least taken ideas from the starter set? Because if you're new to the game, you go and you buy the thing that is most likely to give you what you need, and that's the starter set.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, 5e started with the starter set, and the player's handbook. So in some ways, that was, if you started right when the edition came out, that makes a lot of sense. My experience is colored by going to gaming stores around the nation and
Mhm.
finding just a surprising disconnect between the folks there and anything online. And so,
Mhm.
like, none of those folks take polls. And a
Right.
lot of the folks that come into the stores come in because they're buying stuff and often leaving, but they kind of go like, well, all right, I'll try this little, game, or I'll hang out here, I'll talk to you for a bit. And that's where I'd get to interact with them before they disappeared back into the Neverland
Mhm.
where they normally dwell, just with their own home game group, right? And so I just think there's a vast number of people that operate the way we did before the internet existed. Like, I am playing with my
Mhm.
buddies, we run our game our way, we
Mhm.
don't connect to the greater world that's out there. And I doubt that group, that kind of demographic, is just running things as written. I think they're just exploring the game in their particular way, as we did, back in the
Yeah,
80s and 90s and so on.
sure. I could
I don't
totally
know.
see that.
But it's a good
The
question, and I think
Yeah.
where were you gonna go with it?
Oh, the other question is about the majority of groups not don't play published adventures.
Mhm.
It's hard to say, but I believe the DMG has to trust adventures to tell people how to use them.
Yeah.
So the content of the Dungeon Master's Guide can help people create their own stuff, even if it is a published adventure. And in
Mhm.
fact, they're doing that in the next Dungeon Master's Guide, as we will talk about in a bit.
Right.
They are putting in like I think Chris said an actual campaign.
Mhm.
So that's not necessarily an adventure, but it's the best way to teach, right?
Yeah.
Is to, I want you to do this. Here are 12 examples of different things you could do to use as a template. So, if you want people to create good adventures, you can tell them how to do it, but you also want to show them how to do it.
Right. Right.
And so I think that's hopefully an important step in all of this as well.
Yeah, it's super interesting. And I guess it's interesting to think through whether the, PH, should the player's handbook have a default assumption, or to what extent it should speak to different types of games like that, because
Mhm.
it can be different to say, hey, work with your DM, or understand the limits of a published adventure that you may be in. That could be advice for a player, but it isn't currently.
But I mean, that's what organized play is, right? That's number one on
Hmm.
your player list is you have to realize that you are in an adventure, and
Yeah.
it is a walled adventure, and trying to go outside of the walls, your DM could do that, but you will have a better experience if you understand that you are in a movie
Yeah.
and you are going to follow the thread of this movie instead of just running off and doing something that the movie going audience does not really want to see.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so thank you to both Chappie and Graham for those amazing questions.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about the news, and a good bit of news. The largest bit of news was that interview with Jeremy Crawford on D&D Beyond. We will get to that in our main segment, as I said. So let's talk about Critical Role. I've heard of those folks.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
They've got a presence.
yeah, and along with their Darrington Press allegiance, they are going to publish not one, but two new role-playing games, as well as a new board game. So the name of the board game is Queen by Midnight. It is sort of a deck building RPG-ish game, as far as I could tell. And then the two role-playing games are called Illuminated Worlds and Daggerheart. Daggerheart is going to be the larger, more long-form role-playing game, and Illuminated Worlds is sort of a shorter, limited
Hmm.
campaign role-playing game.
Yeah. More of an
And
indie type experience, it sounds like.
exactly. And so you can there Darrington Press gave an inaugural state of the press video and press release. So I'm going to withhold my judgment or comments on that till I see a little bit more, except to say more games is more better.
Yeah.
So I hope that these are amazing and they do exactly what they want and find an audience who want to have a particular game experience.
In both watching really in watching this state of the press video, I mean, one of the things that struck me is that Critical Role is able to operate at a scale and in a way that other companies can't, right? So it doesn't matter if there's been a role playing game out there that's been around for 20 years. Critical Role has the capability to throw together a video that looks so polished with special
Mhm.
effects and beautiful sets, and the lighting's just so, and the makeup and all of this. Everything looks amazing. And the board game looks like super cool with, while it's obviously cardboard structure, still it's like, really nice pieces to this board game that they clearly have invested in. This is not a cheap board game to manufacture, and the video is not cheap to run, but they have in-house people who do these kinds of effects, right? So they can operate at a very professional level in ways
Mhm.
that few can. Does that
Mhm.
translate to sales? Not clear, right? I mean, they clearly
Yeah.
have the audience and the platform for it, but we'll have to see what the success will be of especially Daggerheart, because that's something that could be a big deal at a time when lots of companies are trying to enter into this space and maybe grab some market share and some attention, right?
Mhm. And that's been the multi-million dollar question for several years now is yes, Critical Role is a phenomenon. It's amazing. It has so many fans. Do those fans buy board games? Do those fans buy role-playing games?
Yeah.
Uh, and as you said, the jury's still out on that, partly because we don't have hard and fast numbers. Uh, so it's
Yeah, I
hard to
mean,
say.
the numbers we do have suggest that it isn't, so far they have not, caused endless reprints of the D&D Critical Role books, right? As
Mhm.
sales are fine, right? They're good.
Right.
The Amazon show is getting rebooted, but it's not something that you find being talked about everywhere, right? So how does that work? Well, we'll have to see, and especially would that translate to an effect where if they shifted and said we're going to use Daggerheart now as the role playing game that drives all our streaming shows, does that mean Daggerheart sales in a huge amount? Maybe, maybe not, right? It's
Yeah.
who knows.
An interesting story to follow.
Hmm.
An interesting story to follow up on is that the game Into the Motherlands will now be published by Green Ronin. So Into the Motherlands was a Kickstarter, and the game itself was supposed to have been published by, is it Andrews McMeel,
Yeah. Yeah.
which then shut down its RPG side of things, leaving Into the Motherlands with no publisher. Well, Green Ronin has picked it up and now will become the publisher, and everyone seems happy about it. Green Ronin seems happy about it. The principals behind Into the Motherlands seems happy about it. So we will get the game published. It will just be with a new publisher.
Yeah, I think it's a tough one to watch. Lots of us want to see Into the Motherlands succeed, but it's in that tough place where it launched without rules. And at first, it thought, well, we're going to use the Cortex system. The Cortex system license is problematic, so we're not going to do that. We're going to write our own game system, which is, as those of us in the industry know, not easy. And so it's a tough place, right, where you really want to cheer them on and see this succeed, but there's a lot of peril in the course that's being taken. Having and then losing their publisher, so now they've got a publisher, so we know the books will be printed, they'll be distributed, they'll appear in stores. Cool. Will it take off beyond there? Is who knows, right? But hopefully this is a success story for everybody involved.
Mhm. And another bit of crowdfunding news, this one interesting because it's coming from a sort of different direction, is that there will be a Gloomhaven role-playing game that will crowdfund on BackerKit rather than Kickstarter.
Mm,
Okay, that in itself is pretty big news.
yes.
And for those of you who are not familiar with Gloomhaven, it's a board game. It's a massive board game that kickstarted to multi-million dollars and continuing great sales. And it's a board game that treads quite heavily into role-playing game territory.
Mhm.
So now the question is, will the role-playing game capture the imagination and capture the money of the people that are board gamers who are now being pushed gently toward the role-playing game? And the answer right now seems to be probably, because there are already 30,000 people who have signed up for the campaign to follow the campaign itself, and it won't even launch until June.
Wow.
So that's a lot. That shows that Gloomhaven and its follow-up, which was it Frosthaven?
I think
I
so.
think. Yeah. Uh has at least the capacity and the probability of being able to compete in the RPG field. We know their game design is solid because it's a solidly designed board game. We'll see how that translates, taking that extra step into the role-playing game field, which
Yeah.
can be difficult. So we'll find out.
And on the Kickstarter side versus BackerKit side, right? That all
Yeah.
is interesting to watch. There are a number of other crowdfunding platforms that are out there. And so as that situation develops, it'll be interesting to see what kind of success they have comparatively here. And one of the things that's tough is it's never a direct comparison, right? So this is not an expansion of Gloomhaven. So it's just, will this be a huge success story as an RPG? And how do you compare that to how they did with their Kickstarters? Will they go back to Kickstarter, for example, for their next actual expansion?
Or
We don't know,
yeah.
right? But it's interesting to see that develop.
Yep. Another fun thing to keep an eye on. So Teos, have you ever played at a really large gaming table? Like a
I
single
I have
table?
played at a table with more than 30 people
Mhm.
in
I
playing the
ran a
same thing once.
I ran a 42 person table once during an interactive in Living Greyhawk.
Mhm.
And we've played at some pretty large events, some big events. But the Guinness Book of World Records tells us that this past Saturday, the world record was set for the largest D&D game ever with 1,227 players.
That is big.
That is a lot of players. You wanna take us down this this little
Yeah. So
path
this
of
this took
large D&D
place
games?
at the Provo Town Center in Provo, Utah. And the event organizer, Andrew Ashby, his family has a game store there. And I guess the mall had told Andrew, hey, if you ever want to throw like a big event, we'll work with you. And apparently, for like 8 years, Andrew sort of saved up and worked on this concept and then ran 200 tables with up to 7 players at each table. There is a head DM, Dax Levine, who worked a story around Vecna, with the tables all playing the same event to stop Vecna's undead army and save some city. And so seeing the pictures and reading the article about this, which we've got a link to in our show notes, it's a lot of fun. But one interesting thing is Guinness said that they would need to have more than 500 players. And I thought, well, I know for sure there have been a number of events that have had more than 500 players. And one of them I helped run, the 2014 D&D Crypt Garden Adventures League Interactive, that really kind of kicked off the AL when the 5e rule set came out. We had, I think, 101 tables, but and we had 700 players or so. There have been some Paizo Gen Con events that may have been larger than that, that took place around that time frame. So I know we had more than 500 players that the Guinness record said they needed, but 1,227 that's a hard one to meet. Like that's a and we've been actually on the Baldman Games Discord. There's been a fun discussion about could you do this, and would you even want to do this outside of a special event? And the answer is probably not, because you don't want to lock up that many DMs for just one 4-hour or however long block, right? But so it kind of doesn't make sense except in this kind of format.
Yeah, I know. Even outside of the Crypt Garden thing, Baldman Games at Gen Con has run events that have at least over 100 tables, and if you assume 7 players, 6 players in a DM, that's well over. That's closing in on 1,000, and it is too much. You want it. You don't want it to be official, because when you say official, like an Adventures League thing or a Wizards Run thing, the fun of it can break down if you try to make the interactive portion an important part of the story. So you almost want to run a thing that's not official, that you just have these 200 tables and they're all doing their own thing. And everyone succeeded. Yay, we beat Vecna's army. But to try to pull off the logistics of a really interactive event there, which you want to do if you're running an official Adventures League, Wizards of the Coast event, you need a cast of thousands.
And Shawn, you and I have had these kinds of discussions when we worked on things like the Open. I don't know if you remember this, but my sort of number one criteria for the success of such large events, do you remember what it is that I would always say?
And I don't remember.
It's the sound system.
Yeah. Oh, for
and
sure.
Nobody ever remembers this. And everybody always says, oh, yeah, we'll have a great sound system. And then someone shows up with like a paper cone or a handheld speaker. And I laugh because I've worked in audio a lot, and I know there is no way anyone's hearing us with what you've provided. And even at the 2014 Crypt Garden event, there were, 2 large-ish speakers, which was sufficient for some people to hear the event. But there were a lot of people who could not hear, and DMs who could not hear and misran things. And that's the thing that no event ever thinks to invest in properly. The sound system, so you can hear what is happening, is so critical. And we even had like flags and stuff so that it wasn't all just audio based. And it's a big problem to the experience.
Yep. We always end up with Master of the Multiverse, Shawn Molly, standing on a chair or on a balcony, just screaming instructions or box text out to all the tables. And he has the voice for it and lots of practice, but it doesn't beat a good sound system.
Yeah.
So
shout out to those people who are loud.
Yes. So that was the largest D&D game ever. And we're going to end our news segment. I am going to be on the D&D Beyond Twitch. However, because we are in the past speaking toward the future, I will have been
You
on
were on.
the D&D Beyond live Twitch stream. Ben Byrne of Ghostfire Gaming and I are going to go on and talk with Latia and Sarah about what we do at Ghostfire, some of the things we've done, what we're working toward, and about D&D fun in general. So you can
Fantastic.
check that out on the D&D Beyond Twitch stream.
Yeah, we've got a link in the show notes to where you'll find the video on demand.
Mhm.
And that's great news because it means that we were there for the Forge of Foes, and it was sort of talked about as this may be the first of a series that shares a spotlight, shines a spotlight on third-party publishers and smaller companies. And and that's great. I was worried that they might look around and say, well, I don't know, who else would we really put on? It's hard to find individuals that are really creating printed materials and larger materials that reach a wide audience. So seeing this happen is great and very encouraging. I'm excited. Good job, D&D to be on.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad you and Mike and Scott didn't kill it. We'll see what Ben and I can do. What kind of havoc we can wreak.